It's been said over and over again as we've gathered that we have to be divine scientists, divine physicists and divine alchemists, and all of these aspects have to be brought into play in order for us to know the arcane laws or the mysteries. There is a story that has many, many versions in many different persuasions, but for me it's the Sufi version that has the thread that has the possibility to take us into the knowledge of a supreme arcane law. Let's see if the telling of this Sufi version of a very well-known story can allow us to have a gleaning of what that law is that's present in life. There was a wandering dervish, and in the way of wandering dervishes, it was his purpose to gain knowledge, to have the experiences of life that would bring for him wisdom. But in the way of the Sufi teachings, and all dervishes are aspiring to be Sufis, whenever a question arose, rather than ponder on it in his mind, he would drop it, knowing that in time the wonderful alchemy of life would bring up the answer to his question. Now one day this dervish had traversed a broad desert, a great expanse of sand, and as he was coming out of the desert, he entered a land that was very sparse. There were hardly any trees. It was quite barren. All he could see wandering around were a few cattle. But as he moved deeper and deeper into these outer fringes of that vast desert, he found that it was indeed cattle grazing land. It wasn't made for agriculture, but he could see that this was a cultivated farm or ranch, whatever we would like to call it. And pretty soon he came across several cow herders. Now by this time he was weary. He was longing to find a place to rest, to lay down his body and have some repast. So he asked the cowherders, was there anywhere he could stay? Well, the cowherders said, well, we live in a village nearby, but we don't have any inn, we don't have any guest house. But there's no doubt that Shakir would give you hospitality. And they gave directions how to arrive at Shakir's house. So the dervish made his way, and then he came across several men sitting under a tree resting, smoking their pipes, and just to ensure that he had the directions correct, he asked them, was he on the way to Shakir's house? And they confirmed that he was, but they also gave him the information that Shakir was the richest man in town. He owned the greatest number of cattle. But you know, the word Shakir means one who thanks the Lord constantly. So when the dervish came to the rather palatial home in which Shakir lived and knocked on the door, he was indeed given hospitality. He was welcomed in by Shakir himself, and he found that Shakir's wife and his children were equally as caring and hospitable. So they gave him an evening repast, invited him and gave him a very comfortable place to stay for the night, And the next morning, when he was about to take his leave, they even gave him a little basket of food to send him on his way. But as he was thanking Shakir for his hospitality, he remarked, "You know, you're very fortunate to be a wealthy man." And Shakir responded to him, "Ah, but dervish, remember, this too shall pass." Now the dervish went off on his way, and in his travels he had many experiences. And, of course, following the Sufi way, he allowed those experiences to be digested until they brought up understanding and wisdom and knowing within himself. But as it so happened, his travels brought him back the way he had come. And so he found himself again at Shakir's house. But Shakir's house was empty. He was no longer there. And when the dervish inquired, they pointed him to a village nearby. And when the dervish arrived there, he came to again a palatial house. But when the door was opened, it was by a Shakir who was dressed in rags. And when the dervish inquired of him, Shakir said, "Oh, there was a great flood, and my house was flooded and my cattle were washed away. And now I'm a servant for the wealthiest man of this village." But again, the dervish was given this time simple hospitality. And as he was leaving, he said to Shakir, "I regret that you have been brought to these straits." And Shakir said, "Ah, dervish, but remember, this too shall pass." Now when the dervish went off, as he had done before, he pondered the question that arose related to this. But he had to remind himself, no, one does not ponder on what appears to be a problem or a question. One leaves it. And so he did. The question remained unanswered. But somehow he found himself returning again to where Shakir lived. And this time it was found that Shakir had passed away. And so the dervish went to his tombstone, a tomb that had been set up for Shakir, a good man, a kind man, a wise man. And the epitaph on his gravestone was, "This too shall pass." Now when the dervish saw this, he wondered why. Why would anyone have this put on his tombstone? I mean, we know that there's an end to life, but this too shall pass on a gravestone? So the question still remained unanswered. So he went off again, putting this question deep inside himself. But again he was drawn back to this place. But it had been several years, and when he came back, the tombstone and the grave were gone. A great wind had come through and raised the land. There was no sign, no trace of even a stone left from Shakir's tombstone or tomb. As the dervish sat to ponder on this, suddenly he had a realization, and he remained in that place. He stayed there. He built himself a little hut, and people came from near and far to seek his counsel. Then one day the king sent out a messenger. He sent out a messenger stating that he would like to have a gift that when he was sad would allow him to come back to realize the place that lays between. And when he was happy, he could be brought back to the place that lays between happiness and sadness. And so it came to the ears of the dervish. So the dervish had a thought of the ideal gift for the king. So, with his humble means, he asked the messengers to seek out their artisans to make for the king a ring. And within that ring was embossed the words, "This too shall pass." When the gift was given to the king, he was greatly, greatly pleased, because he knew when he read those words, if he was happy, they would allow him to have a realization. And when he was sad, again they would allow him to have a realization. This too shall pass. Now we know the meaning of this too shall pass. We know that in our life, every experience has a beginning and an end. They might be short, they might be long. Beginning and an end. But in our quest to find the ultimate arcane law, the ultimate law of movement that allows us to recognize the whole essence of the purpose of life itself. The story leads us to it. When you look at your lives and know and have lived so many phases of this too shall pass, this phase, the next phase, the next phase, and so on. What does it denote for us? All of these beginnings and endings. What is it that lies beneath these experiences? It allows us to come to know the ultimate arcane law of movement, or the purpose of life. If at this moment you cannot grasp it, be like the dervish. Follow this law of itself, that when we disallow the mind from engaging in its machinations to try to solve an enigma, to let it rest, even a problem, unfinished business, a question, let it rest. Because the divine scientist, the divine physicist, the divine alchemist that we are, has to, must, it's a law, bring up the answer for us. As an answer, or in a resolving of what it is that's unfinished, unknown, and not to be understood in our life. We don't need then, ever, to get caught or need to be that king that looks at his ring and says, this too shall pass. How can that be? But we do come to the place where we don't have any more questions. And our travels are wandering us